I decided to exclude my mother from my will. Before I sound like the evil villain, let me explain exactly why I came to this agreement. And guys, just know it's very crucial because I won't be here for much longer.
Hey, so I don't really know where to start. This is a bit hard for me. I usually come here for random stuff, but today I'm here to seek some advice. So let's see. To give you a basic rundown of who I am, well, I'm a 32-year-old Chinese male, and I recently got diagnosed with an incurable illness. The doctors, after running countless tests, say that the worst case scenario, I have at least 3 months to live, and in the best it should be around 7. Well, I've already used 2 of those months, which so far seem to be going in the best case scenario. Still, it sure had been the hardest 2 months of my life. As imagine life going perfectly one day, and in the next you're being told that you have only a small window of time left on this earth, and with the ones you love. It forces you to come to terms that the dreams and hopes you had in the future will never be accomplished, and that as each day passes, that's one less day of health. Still, that's not so much why I'm here, as I guess in these 2 months I could say I've come to somewhat terms with the fact that, crap, I'm gonna die, and ain't really nothing I can do about it. So you may now ask, then, if not to seek the attention from the internet with a sob story, then why am I here? Well, I'm dying, and even though I'm only 32, I did make quite the little fortune for myself. I didn't waste my God-given years. Since now that I'm dying, I can't carry that crap with me, so that leaves me with the question, what to do with it? Well, I luckily have a beautiful wife, 29, female, that has been with me through every step of my journey for the last 10 years. She even invested in my business idea when no one else was willing to do it. And well, here I am with a network of about 15 million, which really isn't even half of my actual wealth. So anyways, after finding out that I'll be kicking the bucket in approximately 6 months, I planned my will, and even though I'm pretty sure it's perfect, there's one little thing that's been bugging me, and I'm not sure if it's the best decision or not. So of course, I left most of my assets and money to my wife, approximately 70% of it. The other 30 I left to my 2 younger brothers, 24 and 25, and my sister, 27. Now, this is why I'm here. You see, my mother, 54, is still alive. And as I just told you, I've left most of my wealth to my wife and the rest to my siblings, which means my mother got excluded. This was not in any way, shape, or form an accident. It was intentional. You may be wondering what kind of son does that. Well, I'm the son that does that. Now, before you drag me across the bed of knives on the interwebs, I have a valid reason for this. You remember me saying my wife invested in me when nobody else would? Well, my mother was one such person who refused to invest in her own son. She was once my biggest believer and investor, but that was way until I entered college. And I met my wife. She changed into somebody who completely was unrecognizable after that. Which is also the reason she not only has strained relationship with me, but a really bad relationship with my wife. And no, it's not my wife's fault. My mother simply hates my wife because number 1, she isn't Asian. Number 2, she isn't rich or the woman my mother chose for me. So when I first started dating my wife, my mother found out and did everything in her power to break us apart, even going to the point of cutting my allowance and tuition. Still, even though our relationship was new, my wife used the little money she'd saved while also taking up extra jobs to help me. When that wasn't enough, my mother had her fired from her job and even tried getting her expelled, causing her to almost lose her own scholarship. My sister was the one to step in and help and prevent that. Only after I went complete no contact with her did she stop. Still, even then, my wife had suffered a lot at her hands, and the relationship they had could never be mended. Anyways, when I was fresh out of college, my wife's distant aunt passed away and left a small inheritance to her. At the time, I had a business idea, and I'd tried loaning money from my mother to do it, but she threatened she'd only do so if I left my wife, which I obviously refused. So what did I do? I turned to the banks, but my mother would always find a way to interfere and make sure that I would not get the loans. My wife instead offered to loan me her inheritance, even though she needed the money just as bad. Luckily, things worked out. And well, over the years, while my business absolutely flourished, my mother's failed. Which brings us to now. She's not in my will because after all that, I don't think she deserves it. So my question for you guys, am I the a-hole for excluding her from my will? What's up everybody, Mr. Reddito here. So we have an interesting story today. There's multiple updates on this one. I hope you guys are having a fantastic day. If you're new to the channel, hello, welcome. My name's Mr. Reddito. Go ahead and click that subscribe button if you want to see more stories like this. And let's hop into the update. Hey guys, firstly, I must say I'm honestly surprised by your reaction to my story. I did not expect this support. Still, it's been around 2 weeks since I've last updated. And well, a lot's happened since then. Since it was drawing closer to the 3rd month and I'd collapsed about 7 times, I decided to request a dinner with all my close friends and family. This was to make them aware of my situation and also inform them of my decision. This dinner was kept yesterday and well, while it didn't exactly go as planned, it all served its intended purpose quite well. Let's give a recap of these last few days. After returning from the hospital for the 6th time, I'd spent the whole week contacting friends and family and inviting them to dinner. I'd stressed a lot on how important it was and how it's extremely needed for them to show up. A lot had teased about the possibility of my wife being pregnant as the reason for the meet, which even though every time it was brought up, my heart would rip itself to shreds in my chest, I still didn't deny as the curiosity of the possibility was enough to guarantee they'd show. Anyways, the last person I contacted was my mother, and let's just say I was dreading that call the most. And rightfully so. The minute she picked up, the phone was after the 4th ring, and her response was this. Well, if it isn't the son, to what do I do the honor of you contacting this useless old woman? That honestly made me mad, as she didn't even try to be pleasant in the least. Hey mama, how you been? Well, I've been as good as any mother that was abandoned by their son once they find a wife. Hey mom, please just don't say that, alright? Are you telling me what I can and cannot say now? Mom, honestly? Please. Honestly, I'm a very impatient man, but she was picking at an unhealed wound with every word she said, and my patient really could not deal with it at that point. I was tempted to hang up, but I'd pushed through. Mom, didn't know I still had a son. Her condescending snare had done it for me, and I just blurted out the info because I didn't want to deal with her anymore. I'm dying, and if you care enough and if you're ready to put your petty grudge aside, then you know where I live, so be there Friday at 3 p.m. sharp. That was all I said before I hung up. She had tried contacting me after, but I just ignored her calls, so on the day of the dinner, everything went well aside from the fact that I could not keep anything down, and I was retching my guts out after every meal. By 2 of my friends were arriving, and it wasn't a lot, just 7 people. 2 I'd known since kindergarten, and 5 I've known through high school and college. Soon after then, my sister and her girlfriend, 24-year-old female, arrived following my brothers. At 3, my mom was nowhere to be seen, and I was forced to start dinner without her. By the time she did arrive, it was already dessert time. She was clad in an elegant white dress, which didn't surprise me, with light makeup on and her scowling face. The mood was instantly dampened as everyone knew of the situation between us. I'd gotten up and greeted her with as much respect as I could squeeze out, but all she did was walk past me and huff, as if I was trash below her. I had to silently calm my wife, as almost instantly she grew angry, because just standing and greeting my mother was a lot of energy from my weak body. Still, as she took her seat, the first thing she asked was, "Who made this?" referring to the dishes on the table. I knew exactly why she did this, but before I could avoid the situation, my wife replied that it was her. And just like that, she immediately began making a fuss about the food, saying how it looked unseasoned, uninspired, how it was unfit for even the lowest of a dog to eat, and just a bunch of unnecessary things. I honestly tried to stay calm as she said all those nasty things, knowing the instant my blood pressure rise, I'm just going to pass out. And then, all my preparing and my wife's efforts would pretty much be all for naught. Still, the more she went on was the more it got to me, and my sister must have noticed how angry I was, because she eventually began berating Mom. making it clear that if she did not want to be present, she was always free to leave, as her negativity was the last thing we needed. By the time Veronica was done, the embarrassment was clear on my mom's face, but she had finally shut up. Her face set in and a brooding expression with a glare. After dessert, I've told everyone to move on to the sitting room, as I didn't really feel that breaking the news to them around the dining table would be good. I chose to sit beside my wife, and as she knew I needed support, she'd taken my hand in hers, lacing our fingers together. It honestly helped me more than she ever knew. It also broke my heart to remember I'd be leaving my love soon. Still, I guess everyone was able to read the room. Well, everyone except for my mother, as she outright interrupted just as I was about to speak. Her words said, "The sham of a woman isn't pregnant, is she?" Her tone was so bitter when she said that, and even as I'd glared at her in displeasure, she continued to stare at us with contempt. "So, what if she is pregnant? What are you going to do about it?" I hissled because at that point I just was so tired of everything, as I'd imagined dying and then having a mother to be on top of this all. "Ruining the bloodline's one of the greatest sins. You should be ashamed of yourself," she continued, which I found laughable, as if we were talking about a ruined bloodline. Then she ruined my dad's bloodline by having us, as we were the farthest in status than he was. Still, the remark that got me was when she said this: "At least then I doubt it could be considered a sin, as who knows? It's highly unlikely the kids are even yours." That remark completely changed my original plans, which was to deliver the news as gradual as possible to avoid shocking everybody. As it was clear, while I was considerate of her feelings, she had zero care towards everything else. "You know what, Mom? Since you know so much, well, I bet you should know that I'm dying. The doctors gave me 4 months in worst case scenario, and 7 months to best. Guess what? 3 months are already gone, so that's 4 months at best. That means, even if she does get pregnant at some point, the probability of it being mine is 0, as I'll likely be dead 6 feet under." Let me tell you, the shock on the face was laughable yet depressing. Especially on hers, it was like a deflated balloon. She legit went pale as a ghost. Maybe there was desperation, but by then I honestly couldn't care, as maybe some part of me wanted her to suffer after she destroyed the relationship we once had. All because she refused to change and accept that I love someone beyond their race and economic background, and I've loved someone who she didn't choose. Still, after the shocked past, there were many questions. Some I was honestly annoyed answering, but I knew I had to. My mother was silent for a major half until the questions of what happens after came up. It was my sister who asked, and almost immediately she was like, "Of course, it would be ours. Is that even a question?" I found it laughable, as the fact that she was already claiming my assets, and I wasn't even dead yet. Worst apart from her initial reaction, she didn't even seem to care too much if I was dying, which hurt, but with me this close to death, I couldn't be bothered to add that to my list of very unwanted thoughts of stress. "Well, Mother dearest, sorry to burst your bubble, but the only people in my will are my wife, brothers, and my little sister." It honestly took her about 7 business days to register that news, and I was the most pleased, allowing her to have those 7 business days. "What? You must be joking," she'd shouted, raising to her feet, staring at me with disbelief. I admit, I was smug seeing her finally grow angry. "No, I'm dead serious." She'd stared at me with such intensity. It was almost as if she wanted to skin me alive and just light me on fire already. "You can't be serious. How can you leave everything to others and nothing to your own mother, you ungrateful brat?" The fact that she wanted to call me ungrateful when she had refused to help me when I've asked her for the most was what I supposed to be grateful for. What am I supposed to be grateful for, Mom? The only person I'm obligated to be grateful to is my loving wife, because without her efforts, I wouldn't have anything even remotely close to what I do now. I could tell that struck a nerve, because her eyes ticked and her face went through a myriad of colors before settling for an angry red. She screamed these words. "No! I am your mother. You should have at least left me most of your assets. I gave you life. I raised you. I cared for you, not some random little chick you picked up on the streets. During college at what? I knew this would happen. I had a feeling she would do this to you. My friends even warned me." She had gone on full-blown tirade, tugging at her hair and clothes like a crazy woman. I was astonished, but I finally saw why my father left and never turned back. I'd originally thought it was just her going crazy for as long as it took her to take the news, as it only fired my decision that it was the right one. Still, when she suddenly stopped and turned her red and widened eyes to my wife and then changed at her, I grew worried. So within the nick of time, I managed to shield my wife from her attack. I don't know what it was, but something heavy had hit me above the head, and the next thing I knew, I woke up in a hospital room. This was all yesterday. When I spoke to my wife after waking up, she said my mother had hit me with a wooden ornament. Luckily, the hit wasn't what caused me to pass out. Instead, I passed out from the spike of blood pressure. Anyways, I guess, guys, that's about it. I guess I am not the a-hole. And I'm back home, as luckily I didn't have to stay in that wretched hospital. Update number 2. Hey guys, this is going to be a short update. It's been about, 3 weeks since my last update. And well, right now, I'm writing this from the back of my Uber driver. I'm currently on my way to meet my mother at a restaurant. I know, dumb idea. Especially after what she did last time, but a few things have led to this. Firstly, after a few days at home and my mother sending multiple messages and threats, my wife had decided to give her a call. She threatened that if she did not stop what she was doing, she would file a complaint about harassment and get a restraining order against her. This made her settle down, but it didn't stop. The rest of the distant family members from fussing and blowing up all over social media, even with that of my wife. Even going as far as to send letters and packages to the office. The words of threat slowly turned to guilt-tripping as I'd cut all contact with Ma. I didn't want to cave, but my condition deteriorated day by day. I decided that I should at least try once again to make amends with her, as in the end, well, many comments said this, but yeah, she is still my mother. That's pretty much what brings us to here now. The drive has arrived, so I'm going to cut this short and go to the meet and see how it goes. I'll give you guys an update after. What's up, guys? Mr. Reddito here. So there's 2 more updates, but I just want to give you a little bit of a warning. Update 3 is pretty drastic. So we're going to jump into that now. Here it is. Well, dang. Where do I begin? Because I have a lot to unpack here. Hopefully, it'll be perfect to explain why I took a whole week to update. As you guys know from my last update, I've gone to meet my mother at a restaurant. Well, that meeting ended in a complete crap show, and here I am. So before walking into the restaurant, I decided to call my wife. I wanted her on the phone line just in case anything went south. Turned out later to be a great decision. So anyways, upon entering, I'd instantly taken notice of my mom all dressed up at one of the window tables on the 2nd floor of the restaurant. Walking up there was a struggle, as I was growing weaker and weaker as the days passed, heck, the hours even. Going up there, she surprisingly had more pleasant expressions than the last few times I've seen her. She was smiling, and when I greeted her with a half bow and acknowledgement, her response was pretty bright and loving. "Mama," I called out. She smiled at me for a moment. It felt as if we were back in the times before college, when she was the most loving and caring mother anyone could ask for. "Son, how are you? I missed you." Hearing those words was certainly the biggest surprise, though, as I could barely recall the last time I've ever heard such words from her. Still, I wasn't against it, as maybe she'd finally come to see her senses and realized her son was indeed dying, and it was about time she gave up on stupid little grudges. Still, boy, oh boy, I was wrong. After that greeting, she had stood up and taken my hand, then began patting me down as if to check to see if I was armed. I admit I watched her like a curious fish. Don't judge, but no one wants to go down as a villain, which included myself. So if I could part peacefully with her, it would be great. So I wasn't hoping for even the possibility seemed slimmer than 2 bullets colliding. "I'm fine, Ma. How are you?" She had smiled brightly and cupped my cheeks and said, "Aw, son, I've been good physically, just a bit down mentally. I've been reflecting on my actions these last few days, and I've come to realize I haven't been the best mother these last few years, and I'd like to say I'm sorry. I just want to ask if you can forgive me." I was shocked, and I knew my shock must make me clear of my face. I probably wouldn't have escaped the shock if she hadn't been started tearing up and crying, which was much more shocking, but with eyes on me from other patrons, I rushed out and I'd forgive her. Without thinking, as I just wanted her to quit crying and settle down, I said it, I forgive her. And I admit I was dumb for that, but try looking respectable in the midst of a restaurant with an older Asian woman crying bitterly and trying to kneel before you. It doesn't look good, and it brings a lot of judgment. Anyways, when I finally got her to settle down, we began talking. I had felt a moment of peace, as it's been years since we were able to have a calm, civil conversation. That didn't involve her berating me or disrespecting my wife. I was a bit skeptical after a point, but then the more we talked, more I started believing that maybe she has changed, as death had always had a way of changing people. So maybe the realization that I had little time had made her finally realize something she had refused to for the longest time. Still, the tone of the conversation shifted after our orders were delivered to us. I'd taken a bite from my sandwich and swallowed, but only seconds after I did, I started coughing, and as usual, it was blood on the handkerchief. She saw it and her whole aura changed. I could see her visibly tense. "What is your diagnosis?" is what the first thing she actually asked, and I didn't really see any harm in telling her exactly what it was. I won't disclose exactly what I have here, but I told her, and I could see the color drain from her face. "So, you really are dying?" She had questions, and I've given a solemn nod because I really couldn't find any right words to say. "How much time do you have left?" She had questions, so I began calculating. "I estimate about 2 months, Ma." So, I told her 2 months. I could see her grow even more pale. To me, she was worried, but as the convo progressed later on, I would learn why she looked so pale. "What are your plans?" she questioned, and for a moment I swore I saw past her, but I convinced myself it's just my mind playing tricks on me. As I had announced before, my will's 70% to my wife, 30% to my siblings. I admit I felt a dash of guilt saying that, as it was clear she was trying to make us work. But even then, changing my will this late would be an issue, not so much legally, but on my own part, as my condition wasn't the best. Plus, I knew my siblings, and even though she would not get anything, they wouldn't let her suffer. They would care for her just as well. She would want for nothing, so there wasn't really a need for any changes. "So, you really plan to leave me nothing?" She had questioned, and to me she seemed really annoyed and angry at this point. I wouldn't lie, so I told her yes. Then I went on to explaining that she would not want me for anything with my brothers and sister around. That was a mistake though, because like before she reverted, and it was as if the mask she was wearing got ripped off, and I realized she had not changed one bit. She was just trying to convince me with the hopes that I'd change my will. And my thoughts were confirmed when she began throwing verses my way and insulting my wife, like she usually does. I honestly didn't want to deal with that, as it made it clear that even my death meant very little to her, telling me that I might as well throw any hopes of things getting better out the door. Anyways, I tried to leave, but she attacked me, hitting me with her hand and something else. I immediately went on the defense and tried to protect my head. Still, pretty soon I could feel pain, and then felt something warm running down my cheek. Then everything grew dark and fuzzy. Like the last time I woke up in that hospital, turns out my mother had in her rage beaten me to the point that she had caused bodily harm. My wife had called the police to my location, and my mother was arrested while I was sent to the hospital. It took a few days for me to recover, but once I was out, we dealt with the case, and I decided to drop all charges, but still decided to have a restraining order filed against her. Mr. Edito here. Guys, here's the final update of the story. Hey guys, so the final update for Am I the A-hole for excluding my mother from my will? Well, after my last update, I had hoped all would go fine and I would be able to die in peace, but no. Turns out my dear mother would not have that. After the restraining order was placed against her, everything was quiet for 2 weeks that followed. My health was worse though. I was pretty much barely eating at this point, and even typing this was a struggle, as my muscles have weakened tremendously. My wife and I were pretty much planning to start planning for the funeral and all that would follow, as by this, even though it was painful, I'd fully come to terms that I'm going to die. I was also pretty much completing a little bucket list I've made. It was one of those bucket list tasks that had me busy a week ago when I called for my sister. At first, I was ignoring it as I honestly just wanted to spend my last moments in peace with my wife. But then as the phone rang and continued to ring, I decided to answer on the 5th ring. And let me tell ya, it was a great decision. During that call, I found out information that saved me from complete disaster. My mother had somehow gotten in contact with my lawyer and she was planning to have him change my will a week before my death. This was to make sure that I would likely never find out about this and my mother is my own kin. Even if the case was to be brought to court, if my lawyer changed everything in her favor, my wife had a much higher chance of losing the case. Knowing that she's willing to do such ruthless means, I decided to play her at her own game. My sister had recorded of them plotting this, which was pretty much enough evidence plus a few pictures of them together. With this plot, I had myself admitted to the hospital and allowed my sister to provide false news that my time was closer than I thought. This forced my lawyer to act, and just like I planned, I caught them both red-handed. I decided this time I'm going to press charges. It's a ruthless move, I know, but to know that they were basically planning to completely rob my wife blind and leave her desolate with no family to turn to, I couldn't just let them get away scotch-free. The case was quick with a lot of evidence. It was hard for them to get out with the deal offered to my lawyer. It wasn't hard to get him to crack. My mother got 3 years house arrest and 6,000 hours of community service, while my lawyer lost his license. Anyways, that's pretty much my life, and yeah, I have about a few more weeks left. That's what the doctors say, at least. I plan to spend them with family. I'll be closing down this account, so thank you to everyone who supported me. I'll leave you with this. Remember, life is short, so live it to the fullest. Goodbye.
What's up, guys? This was one of the saddest stories I've had to read in quite some time. I just want to ask what's your opinion on it. Do you think OP was in the right? Do you think OP was in the wrong? How do you think the mother plays in and what she did? Let me know all your thoughts about this story, guys. And if you've ever been in a similar situation and maybe lost someone like OP that you were really close with, let me know your story. Drop it down in the comment section, guys. Thank you for joining me on today's story. I hope you enjoyed it. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing because I'm here every single day with a new story. Guys, have an amazing day.